We've now spoken about all 18 plus 1 brachot of the Amidah. Having stood before the majesty of God and uttered praises, made requests, and offered our thanks, how do we transition out of our private audience with the divine and back into our lives? In Tractate Brachot of the Babylonian Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan teaches us, at the beginning, one says, Hashem safatai tiftach, may God open my lips. And at the end, one says, Yehiyu l'ratzon imrei fi, may the sayings of my mouth be according to your will. If you remember back to the second session of the series, we stepped into this prayer space with a verse from Psalms 51:17. As Rabbi Yochanan teaches us, Hashem sefatai tiftachu fi yagi techilatecha, may Hashem open my lips, and may my mouth say your praise. A request to God for assistance in praying before we begin to pray. Similarly, Rabbi Yochanan instructs us to step out of the Amidah with another verse from Psalms 19:15. Yehiyu l'ratzon imrei fi v'yagon libi lefanecha Hashem tzuri v'goali. May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, God, my rock and my redeemer. Just as in our opening verse from Psalms, we find two near synonyms, my lips and my mouth, so too here we can draw inspiration from the tension between the sayings of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart. We have been immersed in the practice of vocal prayer. Recall that the so-called silent Amidah is actually to be spoken loudly enough that you can hear yourself. Both in the fixed liturgy and in the space for spontaneous prayer, we've been expressing ourselves through words. But now as we conclude the prayer, we ask that not only our words be received willingly, but also the internal thoughts of our hearts. We are acknowledging an unspoken part of our praying selves that we value and want to be heard. There's a few different ways I think we might interpret the phrase, the thoughts of my heart, as it is added to the words of my mouth. At a minimal level, we're concluding our prayer and recognizing the emotional truths and desires we were conscious of, but we're not quite able to articulate in words, and including them as a part of our prayer. A deeper possibility is that we're referring to unconscious impulses, not just that we don't have the words for them, but we can't reach them ourselves and are not even sure what they are. Of this category, I might ask, why do we trust it? How do we know we want our subconscious, uncontrolled desires to be heard? In Helene Wecker's historical fantasy novel, The Golem and the Jinni, set in immigrant communities of New York City in the turn of the 20th century, there's a character who senses people's unspoken desires. Another character advises her, you must learn how to act according to what people say and do, not what they wish or fear. You have an extraordinary window into people's souls, and you'll see many ugly and uncomfortable things. You must be prepared for them and learn when to discount them. Don't we learn to override and control our own unconscious impulses? Why should we ask God to hear them and take them into account? By declaring my faith in Hegyon Libi, in the thoughts of my heart, I'm declaring my faith in my own inherent goodness, and by extension, in the good of humanity. That belief in my own ultimate good and humanities is itself a value I wish to inculcate in myself through prayer. Perhaps I even wish to enforce an assumption that the deepest recesses of Libi, of my heart, are really a divine place, and I'm thus declaring my faith in God's goodness. A third, more radical way of reading the pairing of Imrei Fi v'Yagon Libi is that they're contradictory. Not the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart, but instead, God should receive the words of my mouth, but the thoughts of my heart. We have said the words of my prayers we are supposed to say, but we want God really to listen to the thoughts of our hearts instead. Personally, this interpretation appeals to me, especially in reference to the prayers for a restored temple service with sacrifices. I recite those prayers because they've been an essential part of the Jewish tradition for generations. But some part of me hopes that God will take into account my heart's authentic yearnings for a different sort of redemption for the world. A few pages further on in Tractate Brachot, after we learn Rabbi Yochanan's teaching to recite this verse from Psalms at the end of the Amidah, there's a list of other prayers for concluding the Amidah. We read the particular personal prayers of 12 different sages, across many generations, what each one would recite after completing the Amidah. The prayer we've canonized in the Siddur is a variant of the prayer attributed to Marbrei de Ravina. Elokai Netzor l'shoni me'ra usvatai medaber mirma. My God, guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking deceitfully. This line is a transformation of Psalms 34:15, a command to guard your tongue from evil and your lips from deceitful speech, into a request of God for assistance instead. You might have thought that we should make this request that we speak no evil before our audience with God. Shouldn't we say this line before reciting the important prayers of the Amidah? Perhaps we can experience the Amidah as an exercise in Shmirat HaLashon, guarding our speech. We're given a holy script with all the right words to say, and even the personal prayers we add within the script have a designated time and place for those extemporaneous elaborations. Also, as we have just assured ourselves, God to whom we are speaking knows our deepest intentions anyways. So now, as we finish the Amidah, we're stepping out of our protected training in proper, sensitized, holy speech, and we're going back into the noisy world in which we speak our own words to other human beings who we are at risk of hurting. In that moment of emerging, we ask that God help us to continue to guard our speech, that God help us to hold on to the elevated, more perfect state that the framework of the Amidah has been holding us in. We continue, V'lim kol alei nafshi tidom, and to those who curse me, may my soul be silent. We are striving for menuchat nefesh, for hishtavut, for equanimity. After the experience of standing before God in prayer, we should spiritually soar beyond petty discourse and potential attacks with the internal peace to be and do in the world without being too impacted by detractors and critics. In the first line of Marbrei de Ravina's prayer, I asked for help in keeping my speech in control. With this line, I'm going further, asking that even my nefesh, my soul, should be silent and calm in the face of adversity. I should feel no resentment. Similarly, we continue, nafshi ka'afar chotiyeh, let my soul be like dust to all. What a remarkable expression of humility or desire for humility. Dust is the epitome of lowliness. It's also the exemplar of something that is so insignificant that it cannot belong to anyone. As before Pesach, we nullify our ownership of chametz by declaring it hefker ke'afara te'ara, ownerless as the dust of the earth. How can we take the example of dust and render ourselves freely available to all who need us? At the same time, God blessed our ancestors, Avraham and Yaakov, that their descendants should be like the dust of the earth. Rabbi Moshe Amiel, chief rabbi of Antwerp and later Tel Aviv, in one of his sermons, quotes an interpretation of this blessing by Rabbi Yehuda Leib Edel, the Maggid of Slonim. Amiel, in the name of Edel, compares the three different metaphors God uses to promise numerous offspring to the forefathers, like the stars, like the sand of the beach, and like the dust of the earth. Dust or dirt, he says, has the quality of self-adhesion, and we observe many particles of dust joined together as if they're a single unit. And not only that, but it's possible to take clods of dirt from different lands and to pour water on them, and they become a single clump, which is a sign that even when they're separated in actuality and potential, they are still unified. When we ask that our souls be like dust to all, we can strive to recognize our inherent unity with all creation. Can we, in our heightened spiritual state following the Amidah, really feel ourselves as a particle of earth in the deep sense, not simply of being lowly, but being ultimately without separate ego, rather being a part of the world of creation? Recall that we opened Marbrei de Ravina's prayer with a transformation of the verse from Psalms, guard your tongue from evil and your lips from deceitful speech. The next verse in that psalm is Sur me'ra ve'aseh tov, shun evil and do good. And tractate Avodah Zarah of the Talmud explains why this verse follows the previous, lest you say, I've guarded my tongue from evil and my lips from deceitful speech, so I will go and indulge in sleep. Therefore, it teaches shun evil and do good, and there's no good other than Torah. It is not enough to keep ourselves from doing harm. We must also actively strive to do good with the Torah as our guide. The Sefer Abudraham, 14th century commentator on the prayer book, says that this teaching on the psalm is the motivation for the next line in Marbrei de Ravina's prayer, Petach libi b'toratecha, u'v'mitzvotecha tirdof nafshi. Open my heart to your Torah, and let my soul pursue your commandments. We started by asking for help to sur meira, to avoid doing evil, by guarding our mouths, and now we ask God's help to aseh tov, to do active good first, that our hearts be open to learning, and then that our very souls chase after opportunities to perform the good works of mitzvot. Sefer Abudraham goes on to explain that pursuing mitzvot is effective at nullifying the pursuit of those who hate you, and that is why the next line of our prayer is V'chol ha'choshvim, alei ra'ah, all those who plan evil against me, mehira hafer atzatam v'kalkel mashavatam, quickly annul their counsel and frustrate their intentions. At this point in Marbrei de Ravina's prayer, in the Talmud appears the verse from Psalms that we opened with. May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, God, my rock and my redeemer. And we do traditionally repeat that line at the end of our closing prayer. But in our Siddur, there are a couple more lines inserted first. The first is a poetic fourfold plea. Aseh laman shemecha, aseh laman yiminecha, aseh laman kedushatecha, aseh laman toratecha. Act for the sake of your name, act for the sake of your right hand, act for the sake of your holiness, act for the sake of your Torah. This line is just a portion of a somewhat longer prayer, Makenu Elokeinu, that is no longer commonly recited, but which opens with pleas for redemption and then includes, with some version of the line we recite, requesting that God act for the sake of God's name. Reciting the second part without the first as we do, the words float a little. It is not clear what we are asking God to do, just that God do for God's sake. After all, our specific requests that we have made in the Amidah, we pronounce here a rhythmic litany of requests with no content. Ultimately, God, we don't know what we need you to do. We just need you to do, or we just need you. Then we recite another verse from Psalms 108:7, which picks up on the refrains of the fourfold plea and identifies ourselves as God's loved one. Laman yehotzun yedidecha hoshia yamincha ve'aneni. In order that your loved ones be released, deliver with your right hand and answer me. And then finally, again, the verse we opened with, may the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, Hashem, my rock and my redeemer. At this point, we separate our legs, which we've been holding together, and we bow our way out of our audience with God. While we recite one last prayer, we bow and take 3 steps backward and bow to our right and to our left. And what is our last parting prayer? Recall that we learn the rabbinic dictum, all blessings are sealed with peace. Our final parting words are Oseh Shalom Bimramav, God who makes peace in God's high heavens. Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, may God make peace upon us. V'Kol Yisrael v'Imru, Amen. And on all of Israel, we say Amen. Personally, I find that while the Amidah constitutes an effort in kavanah, in focused intentionality, the Elokai Netzor prayer that is appended onto the Amidah is an attempt to go even deeper than kavanah. I believe that there's so much happening unconsciously that we are not and cannot be aware of, but that still has deep value and truth. The kavanah of Imre Fi, the sayings of my mouth are ordered, but Hegyon Libi, the musings of my heart, contain an unordered, potent chaos. We have the opportunity to open those deep recesses of ourselves if we honor and trust it. It's not all beautiful or easy. It is also the home of the Jungian shadow side. I don't want this opportunity to be in conversation with God to only be about the nice things, the things I'm supposed to say. I also want to expose the fullness of who I am, including the darkness, and still be accepted, be witnessed, and accept help in that vulnerable state. With this closing prayer, I reach deep within myself, and I reach high beyond myself. Have a beautiful day.